All right, let's talk about night operations. Flying at night is actually a lot of fun, and pretty sweet. The air tends to be smoother. The radios are quieter since there's less traffic, and it can be more relaxing. Uh, but flying at night is different than flying during the day. Your eyes function different at night. You have no visual references that you would have during the day. It's no longer available at night, and there's additional illusions that can lead to a pilot being potentially disoriented and can lead to a dangerous situation. So, additional items need to be briefed before night flying, and additional information needs to be understood. So, that's what we're going to talk about today. So, we'll start off by talking about our eyes. So, during the day, we use our cones and our rods. So the cones is our center of the retina. It's whatever I'm looking at directly, basically, is the cone is responsible for. Also for color detail and faraway objects. And then we have our rods, which is the ring around the cones, used for our peripheral vision and for dim light, or for what we're talking about, night operations. So again, cones and rods are used during the day, but at night, we use almost exclusively our rods. So we talked about our rods being in charge of that peripheral vision, and so this is a good, mental image of that. Our best night vision is our peripheral vision, and then what we're staring directly at is this night blind spot. So off-center viewing is necessary at night. So when we scan for other traffic, we're going to be utilizing this off-center viewing, utilizing our peripheral vision to scan for traffic. And we also have night vision. So we can get night adapt, basically, night vision adaptation. And staring at a bright light can lose that night vision. All right. I'm going to let that fire truck go by. All right. We're going to talk about some lighting on our airport. So we'll start off with our taxiway. Our taxiway edge lights are blue, and it's outlined on the edges of our taxiway. If installed on the taxiway, there's also centerline lights that are green, and then stop bar lights. So whenever ATC gives a clearance, if installed at this airport, I've never actually seen stop bar lights in my flying. And they're usually only installed at these larger airports. But they will they will change color, confirming ATC's clearance to enter across an active runway in low visibility situations. Our lighting on the runway is first our runway edge lights. So on the sides of the runway, we have these white lights that will eventually turn yellow on the last 2,000 feet of the runway, or last half of the runway, whichever is shorter. And then lights marking the end of the runway on the opposite side. After, if I'm lined up on the runway, the very back of the runway will be this big line of red lights. And then we have our runway end identifier lights. So these rail lights are these bright white flashing lights that are super bright, situated alongside the threshold of the runway. And this will give an indication to landing traffic where that threshold is, especially if there's no runway lights, like centerline lights installed on the runway. It'll let that landing traffic know where that threshold is so that they can land beyond it, and is important so that they don't land before that displaced threshold. On the runway, there's also, if installed, the runway centerline lighting system. So it's only installed on some runways. I've never been to an airport that has the centerline lighting system, or actually any of these lights on this page. Then also touchdown zone lights, just to illuminate that touchdown zone. Then taxiway centerline lead-off lights and lead-on lights. So similar to those yellow lines when you taxi onto the runway, those yellow lines that'll situate you onto the runway centerline, or to lead you off onto the intersecting taxiway after you've landed. Those will basically just be illuminated. And land and hold shore lights. So these, it would be a row of pulsating white lights, giving you an additional indication, especially at night, for where you hold short if you're have been given a lasso clearance, and you're operating, of course, at an airport with lasso operations. Approach lighting systems for us in VFR flight basically is just used to identify and recognize the runway. Another way to maintain situational awareness while on an approach to land is using VASIs if available, so keeping the 2 red, 2 white, or PAPIs if available. Usually PAPIs are more common. And utilizing this and using this as a resource to maintain obstacle and terrain clearance, maintaining a stable approach. Additional lighting at airports are a rotating beacon. So beacons will be on at airports from, if installed of course, from sunset to sunrise, and or during IFR conditions, so less than 3 statute miles of visibility or ceilings less than 1,000 feet. So at a civilian land airport, the beacon will flash white and green. At a military airport, white, white, green. Water airport, white, yellow, and then lighted heliport, green, yellow, white. So the only, what we should be looking out for, especially because we're landing at civilian land airports, is white, green. And you might think it could be mistaken if between the white, green, and then white, white, green for the military airport. It's actually pretty distinguishable. My home airport is semi-close to a military base, and I've seen at night the beacon of the military base, and the distinguish between the 2 white flashes and the green is noticeable. So you shouldn't be getting confused between a land airport beacon and a military airport. Lighting. So controlling airport lighting. At a towered airport, at a towered field, it's usually controlled by the tower. So if you're wanting the lights to be brighter, you can talk to tower and let them know if they can turn the runway lights to its highest intensity, and they'll do so, or lower, or whatever you need. If that airport tower is closed, or you're at an airport that is not towered, the lighting is usually pilot controlled, in which you'll key in on your mic a certain number of times on a specified frequency, usually the CTAF frequency that you're giving your radio calls on anyway, and the number of number of times that you key in the mic will dictate the intensity of the lights. So 3 is low intensity, 5 times is medium, and 7 times is high. So and it has to be within 5 seconds or whatever is listed in the chart supplement. But 3, 5, and 7 is the standard and is pretty universal. So let's talk about some disorientation and illusions at night. So the first is autokinesis. So autokinesis is when I'm flying at night and I'm staring at a light with a dark background for an elongated period of time, and then the light will appear to move on its own. So it almost looks like, I'm going to give like a baseball analogy, like from the batter's perspective, looking at what a knuckleball looks like, where it's just kind of like shifting around, kind of seemingly in random directions. So that's why we don't focus on a single light when we're flying at night, especially on a dark background, and we're not looking at that and orienting the aircraft based on that position, because that light is moving around, and that's just a visual illusion. The next is a false horizon. If there's a city lights in the distance, and I'm using that to orient the aircraft to what I think is the natural horizon, and it in fact isn't, I could be putting the aircraft into dangerous bank attitudes and or pitch attitudes. So this is where that theme that I'm going to be talking about a lot, is, especially at night flying, of trusting your instruments, is going to come into play here. At night, there is a greater emphasis on instrument flying and focusing on our instruments than during the day, because we lose all those visual references that we would normally get during the day. All right, we've got reversible perspective illusion. So an aircraft can appear to be moving away or approaching based on the intensity of the lights. And so this illusion is, if I see a light that's dimming, I may think that aircraft is moving farther away, or if the light is getting brighter and brighter, then I think the aircraft is getting closer and closer, which may not be the case. So that's reversible perspective illusion there. The next is featureless terrain. So the absence of ground features can create the illusion the aircraft is higher than it is, especially when you're flying over non-populated areas and you look down and you're flying at night and it's just this dark, abyss. It feels like you're flying really high up, and so that's what this featureless terrain is. Even flying over the ocean, that's what it feels like. When I've done night flights, and I did a go around on a flight to the Hoquiam airport, and as I was turning around, just looking out onto the Pacific Ocean, it's just this black abyss. And so if you're not trusting your instruments, then really, you have no reference to any sort of outside visual reference. And so, again, that's just featureless terrain. Visual obscurities. So rain, haze, dark environment can cause low approaches. Anything that's restricting our visibility can cause a low approach and make the runway feel farther away than it really is. Ground lighting. So ground lights can be mistaken for runways or approach lights. Bright lights can create the illusion that the aircraft is closer to the runway than it really is. So, when combating these illusions in pre-flight, that would be a great thing to not only brief and be aware of, but having a plan, learning and knowing the challenges of the area you're flying in. So if I know I'm going to be going to, I'll use that Hoquiam airport, for example, I'm going to know, hey, if I do a go around and I re-enter the pattern here, I'm going to lose all sort of vision on the side of the Pacific Ocean because it's just going to look like a black abyss. And so having that knowledge of that beforehand can help you anticipate these illusions to maintain situational awareness when you eventually run into them in flight. So in flight, verify attitude by reference to your instruments. We have less visual references. Go around if you're unsure, and consider using supplemental oxygen if you have that available. The FAA does recommend utilizing supplemental oxygen at night above 5,000 feet. So if you have that, definitely use it. All right, let's get into some night operations. So pilot and plane. FAR 6157B states to act PIC carrying passengers from 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise. The pilot in command must make 3 full stop landings in the same time frame within the last 90 days. Basically, I need 3 full stop landings within the last 90 days in order to carry passengers from 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise. I have to be the sole manipulator of the flight controls, and of course, has to be in the same aircraft type, category, class, and type if required. Additional requirement is, of course, we have our 8 tomato flames for our day VFR required equipment. At night, we have additional equipment that's required. So it's 8 tomato flames plus now flaps. So flap stands for fuses, or in my aircraft, we have circuit breakers installed, so that takes that requirement. Landing light, anti-collision lights, position lights, and a source of power. Instrument equipment does not hurt. Technically, for a VFR flight, you don't need to have a standby attitude indicator, but that might be something where, hey, if my attitude indicator fails at night and I have no reference to the horizon, that could potentially be hazardous. And so just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. And we need to take actions that aren't just abiding by the law but are being safe, basically is my main point there. During our pre-flight, during night, white flashlight for the inspections, walk around, but with extra emphasis on the night equipment, so checking the antennas and additional night equipment, making sure our lights operate and work, and check the ramp for obstructions, especially if we're pulling the plane out and we can't see as much at night. We Don't want to accidentally taxi into a new pothole that was made, or something left out on the ramp. For engine start, pretty much the same. We're going to turn on our anti-collision lights, of course, and announce clear prop like we always would, taking extra precaution. And at night, it's usually colder, so to avoid that battery drain, leaving off all unnecessary equipment until after we start. For the taxi and run-up, we're going to be taxiing slower than we usually would and keeping our eyes outside, not being on our iPad or programming an approach or anything into the G1000, staying competent and fully keeping our eyes outside for the duration of our taxi. For the airport operation, being familiar with the airport taxiway markings, lights, taxiing slower for situational awareness. Normal run-up, except airplane movement is harder to detect, and just be cautious around other people, aircraft, and equipment. So keeping your lights on so that other aircraft can see you. For takeoff and climb, pretty much the same procedures during the day, except we just lose our visual references. So where we usually would maybe put our dashboard up to the horizon, and that would give us that that VY climb. Now we lose that reference to the horizon potentially, and now our flight instruments are used to a greater degree. So the takeoff and climb, entering the runway, clearing final approach, turning on all our lights, lining up approximately 3 feet off center line to prevent blending in with the runway lights. That's for any other landing traffic that's potentially on final to see you and to prevent a runway incursion. And verify proper runway, verifying that if you're taking off runway 16, making sure you see 16 in the paint and the pavement. Takeoff roll, of course we have our landing light on per our pre-takeoff checklist. Climbs, of course, same during the day, but less visual references and using our instruments. Clouds and low visibility is harder to detect at night, so gradual disappearance of the ground can give you an indication that you could be entering lower visibility in clouds. Especially dangerous. I'm flying out of the Seattle area, and at night it tends to be colder, especially in this time of year. If it's colder and you're in the clouds, that could be an icing hazard, and so all these risk factors continue to stack up, and that's kind of why night flying inherently is a little bit more dangerous, or I shouldn't say more dangerous, a little bit more risky. So we need to take additional actions and brief additional items in order to keep night flying to be safe. So don't attempt to fly through poor visibility. Just turn around and return in VMC conditions. If we're flying VFR and we find ourselves in IMC, then not ideal. Large bodies of water, easy to become disoriented with no horizon, and rely on instruments. Like that example I gave when I was flying at an airport right on the Pacific Ocean, on the southwest corner of Washington. Looking at out in the Pacific, I couldn't tell where the horizon was and where the sky began and where the sea began. It was just entirely black on that whole abyss, it seemed like. And I'd never experienced that before, and I got extremely disoriented. So just got to be aware of that. Ground-based lighting. So in flight, lighting can appear different at different altitudes. Our nav lights, so orient with other traffic. Remember, the red light's on the left, green light's on the right. So if I see other traffic, based on their nav lights, I can tell what way that aircraft is heading. And navigating. So night references can be easier to see than day references. If I'm making, a cross country and I'm flying at night, I'm going to use references that I could see at night, and I'm not going to use a lake in the middle of nowhere that I can see in the day but can't see at night. So using points where there's large concentration of lights or pattern lights. In the traffic pattern, you want to identify the airport as soon as possible. So if I identify the beacon, great. If I use the pilot controlled lighting, and then I see the runway illuminate, then great. You just want to be able to identify that airport as soon as possible. If you have your GPS, use that, and fly normal traffic pattern. Distance can be deceiving. Trust your instruments and maintain situational awareness. Our approach, it's stable, but again, greater focus on our instruments because we lose our visual references. Without centerline lights, like at my home airport, a line between the edge lights, and our touchdown and round out. So at night, there's a tendency to round out high. And, what happens if we round out high is we're running into more induced drag than we would if we were further down in ground effect. And so that can be hazardous because we're going to lose a lot of energy faster when we round out high rather than rounding out 5 feet above the runway where we normally would. And so that's something to be cautious of at night. If you've never flown at night, you definitely will round out high. It's just everyone does it. I even flew at night it had been months since I'd flown at night a couple months ago. And I kept rounding out high and I didn't understand why. And I remembered this is the exact reason. At night, you have that judgment of height difference that's impaired at night. And people have this tendency. In the traffic pattern, of course, you can always make a go around. So a prompt decision, even more necessary at night. Just flying a normal go around, again, greater focus on the instruments, just like a night takeoff. So some hazards at night. A narrow temperature dew point spread can lead to fog or lead to clouds. These clouds at night, especially in colder times of the year like it is now, can lead to icing developing on the wings and on the airframe if flown into. And clouds and fog are harder to detect at night. And the effect of wind on the plane is not as easy to detect as well. So for an emergency and electrical failure, follow the electrical failure checklist in the POH. Procedure is to reduce electrical load, cycling that battery. I would want to see students cycling the battery and reducing that load, and then landing as soon as possible. For an engine failure, of course, we do our ABCD, airspeed and best place to land checklist, declare the emergency. Establish a normal glide, turn towards an airport or a landing area away from congested areas, but ideally near public access so that search and rescue or whatever services are able to come get you. Of course, attempting to restart and troubleshoot, turning on that fuel pump in the case of an engine-driven fuel pump failure, announcing to ATC, Unicom guard, or whoever you may be talking to, your intentions. Before landing checklist, and then after landing, turning off all switches and evacuating. Distractions are dangerous, especially when they're in flight. If it's a person that's distracting you, maybe you're taking a passenger, they won't stop yapping. Explain the situation to them, ask them to stop. Maintaining a sterile cockpit, taxi, takeoff, climb, descent within the pattern. Aviate, navigate, communicate. So we want to maintain situational awareness. At night, it's easier to fall behind the airplane. And so, again, briefing and understanding the unique challenges that night operations faces to pilots. Having backups, ask for help when needed. Use flight following, especially if you're doing a night cross country. There's less traffic. You're more likely able to use flight following. Definitely have that extra pair of eyes on you. Understand and avoid the illusions, like the illusions we talked about. And again, I've said this probably a dozen times in this presentation, but greater focus on the instruments because we just don't have the visual references that we would have during the day when we're flying at night. Task prioritization. This is where we preach aviate, navigate, communicate. On the ground, clearing takes precedence. Airborne, flying comes first. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Understanding what needs to be accomplished and when. Staying ahead of the airplane, not falling behind. Briefing everything that you're doing. Recognize when you are getting behind, and then finding a way to catch up. Collision avoidance. So, For scanning, we have regular series of short space eye movements plus off-center viewing. Again, when we talked about what type of vision we use at night, we use the cones. Our cones of our eyes are in charge of our peripheral vision, so that off-center viewing is important as a part of our scan when we're flying at night. Clearing procedures, so before takeoff, of course, scanning runway, scanning the final approach. Climb, you can use gentle banks to scan above, below for our wing blind spots. Of course, always talking on the radios. If we're at an uncontrolled field, we're communicating our location and our intentions. We're operating with our lights on, and we know the proper right-of-way rules as well. Terrain, so being hazardous of terrain, if I'm doing a night cross country, this would all have been planned out before the flight, taking into consideration terrain, especially since it's harder to see the terrain when we're flying at night. So knowing the charts and symbology can help. So if I find myself lost, I can try to find out where I'm at and use things like my maximum elevation figure to make sure I'm at a safe altitude. And knowing my minimum safe altitudes, anywhere allowing for emergency descent, over a congested area, 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within 2,000 feet, uncongested 500 feet from the surface, and then water 500 feet from people or property. At night, you want to bump these numbers up. You give yourself more time to potentially deal with an engine failure or a situation by giving yourself more altitude. So, in general, your minimums for weather should go up, because in general risk goes up. If I'm taking passengers, I want to fly at even safer altitudes on much better weather days. So just kind of increasing your tolerance for better conditions, especially when flying at night, and especially when you add additional factors like flying with passengers or flying to unfamiliar places or in an unfamiliar aircraft and unfamiliar avionics, etc. Collision hazards, vigilantly scanning during taxi. Again, not being distracted during taxi. When we taxi, we focus on taxiing. We're not loading an approach. We're not on our electronic flight bag. We're taxiing. In the airport environment, it's not just aircraft. There's vehicles, people, potentially even wildlife. I've been doing touch and goes in an airport before, and a coyote walked into the middle of the runway. It just happens. So just be alert for anything that could be a hazard. If you're landing, going around is always an option. And if you're taxiing, you can always stop until it's safe to proceed. And that is it. Thank you for watching. That was Night Operations.